Well, Griffin,
Here.
Casey,
Present.
McCormick,
Present.
Mooney.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. On today's agenda, we have our 3 year-end ordinances that we do every year, our supplemental ordinance, our transfer ordinance, and the temporary ordinance. In addition, we are going to be considering ordinance number 966, 2020 regarding delivery, third-party delivery services, and the fees that are charged to our restaurants. Because we have guests here from the Ohio Restaurant Association on that piece, I'm going to begin with that piece and then go to the 3 year-end finance ordinances. So let me begin by reading the legislation and the amendments. Ordinance number 966, 2020 by Councilmember Kelly, an emergency ordinance to supplement the codified ordinances of Cleveland, Ohio, 1976 by enacting new chapters 687B, third-party food delivery systems, to establish a limit on the commission that third parties can charge to restaurants located in the city of Cleveland to 15% of the purchase price on delivery or pickup orders while restaurants are unable to provide unrestricted dine-in service, and to prohibit a reduction in compensation for delivery drivers as a result of this limit. Since introduction, I do want to read the amendments. There'll be 4 amendments I'll be reading. In section 1, at section 687B.01, insert new division C to read as follows. C, person means any organization, corporation, for-profit or not-for-profit, partnership, limited partnership, joint venture, unincorporated association, estate trust, or other commercial or legal entity. Renumbering existing section C, D to divisions D and E in existing section 687B.01C in line 1, strike order, such term to exclude, and insert order minus any applicable coupon or promotional discount provided to the customer by the eating or drinking establishment. Such price excludes. In existing division 687B.0 and D, after line 1, insert means any, inserts person engaged in operating A. 2, in section 1, at new section 687B.02, strike lines 3, 4, in their entirety and insert order. The eating and drinking establishment shall provide written notice to third-party food delivery systems requesting a refund of the amount of commission paid in excess of the allowable 15% within 7 business days. No third-party food delivery service shall fail to issue such a refund within 7 business days of the notice. The third amendment is in section 1, strike new section 687B.04 in its entirety and insert section 687B.04 reserved. Last amendment in section 1, at new section 687B.05, strike lines 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in their entirety and insert this chapter shall be in effect only, this chapter shall only be in effect from the effective date of this ordinance until 90 days after eating and drinking establishments are permitted to operate with no restrictions. Okay. What I'd like to do, Jennifer worked extensively on this with the law department. I'll tell you, I introduced it. I'll just tell you the intent. And then we have representatives from the Ohio Restaurant Association here that I'd like to hear their testimony as well. So this came to me when John Barker called me and said that, restaurants are experiencing this difficulty. Especially, there are some restaurants that are in the business of doing takeout. The McDonald's, the Burger Kings, those with drive-throughs. The COVID wasn't really affecting them. Or pizza places where you would normally, where they delivery is just part of their business model. It's the dine-in experience type of restaurants that have had to shift to an online delivery system that are getting hit with generally 30% fees on the delivery. And as most of us know, most restaurants operate on really tight margins, and to 30% is a big chunk of this. So this would limit this to 15, and the broad scale intent is that it is only we only want this in effect while the COVID emergency declaration is in effect. And we want to be sure that the drivers are protected, the people that are just kind of hustling to get through this like we all are. So that's the broad scale intent. Jennifer, if you wanted to talk more about the ordinance or any of the amendments that you think are significant to the committee, and then we will go to our guests.
Through the chair to the council, there's two significant amendments. And the first one would be, let's see, in section 687B, 0.04, that's a section that was entitled contracts, and that has now been stricken from the ordinance. That language had been in there originally to avoid any interference with contract claims, but in discussion with the law department, we feel it is necessary to remove it in order to achieve our legitimate interest in easing the burden on restaurants during this COVID public emergency. The second is in 0.05, the effective date of the ordinance, that now reads, this chapter shall only be in effect from the effective date of this ordinance until 90 days after eating and drinking establishments are permitted to operate with no restrictions. That used to read 120 days after eating and drinking establishments, and we shortened the time frame to give a more definite time after there's no more need for the restrictions. In addition, we clarified that our ordinance takes effect from the effective date of our ordinance. This is not a retroactive ordinance.
Okay, thank you. And I would like to also add that as this ordinance was introduced and has become part of the public conversation, I have spoken with the representatives at DoorDash, and they are not necessarily opposed to it. They had asked for certain amendments, and I told them the amendments we had made. They also suggested that they wanted to put an or clause in where 90 days after the declaration or at such a time when restaurants are operating at 100% capacity without restriction. I explained that we don't have the percent, Ohio doesn't use the percentages like some states do. But the request was that we have or when restaurants are permitted to operate without restriction. So that's for the committee's consideration. I also received a letter from, one second, let me pull it up, and I believe everybody got a copy of this, but I just want to make sure. Where did it go? Got a letter from an organization known as just got two screens up here. I'm sorry about this. TechNet, and it voiced some broad disagreements with the ordinance, and I know that everybody's got a copy with that. Based on that this isn't something for government to be involved in. Strong opposition, especially during this COVID crisis. Vulnerable and ongoing partnerships have enabled restaurants to reach new customers and compete in an e-commerce world. I won't read the whole thing since we were all copied on that, but I did want to put on the public record that I did receive that letter in opposition, and we have spoken to the representatives of DoorDash. With that, I would like to hear from representatives from the Ohio Restaurant Association who have joined us today. I'd like to recognize Mr. John Barker, who is you're the president of the Ohio Restaurant Association?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
Great. Well, welcome to this committee hearing. Can you please provide your comments on the ordinance in question, ordinance number 966/2020?
Yes, thank you, Council President, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for considering this. On the line with me is Todd Bowen, and I know many of you know Todd from other work that we've done with the city, and we just appreciate your time. This is really intended for our independent restaurants around the town, and these are the ones, our mom and pops that don't really have the technology or maybe even the capital to go out and put together their own delivery or and put together, there's a lot of technology that goes into, for example, if you want to create an app for your business, things like that. Many of our smaller restaurants can't do that. So what they do is they lean on a third-party delivery to sort of fill that gap. Kevin mentioned how tight the margins are for a restaurant, and for a good sit-down restaurant, honestly, it's about 6 to 7%. So let's say they have a $10 check. That means they're taking home, let's just say they take home 70 cents from their margin. If you have a delivery fee on top of that at 30%, of course, you're not making any money on that. And so it's just really hard, and they're competing against several of our larger companies that, can really eat these kind of costs. And so whether it's our big chains and things like that. So this is a way to kind of help our smaller operators, at least be able to get into the game and do third-party delivery. And right now, it's really important. Many of our independent restaurants, they're down based on their sales between 20 and 70% versus a year ago. And they've been down that way for most of the summer and most of the fall. And then since the curfew was put in place by the governor and then the stay-at-home advisories, they're down another 50%. And Todd and I talk to all the operators around the city, and they are just, they're just devastated. Every day we listen to them, they're fighting inclined to kind of hang on right now. And so being able to have a little bit lower delivery fees so they could get into that business and maybe keep some of their employees on is what they're really fighting for. And that's why they asked us to introduce this to the council president and have you all consider it. And we would like you to do that. We did have similar legislation moved in Cincinnati. They've had this all summer and extended it. Columbus just passed it. Todd and I are talking to many other jurisdictions as well to try to get the same consideration, and we believe many of them will here relatively soon. And it's, again, trying to get these operators through the winter months and to keep people on. Now, to be fair, if it's a restaurant that has 50 people normally running a restaurant, serving people, taking people to tables, all that type of thing, delivery requires a lot fewer individuals. However, keeping that restaurant open and being able to do pickup, delivery, and as much as in dining as they can is another goal. So we can keep people employed the best we can to kind of make it through the winter. And then, obviously, if the vaccine comes the way we believe it's going to be, that would be obviously a blessing. So that's what we're asking you to consider. And I think you outlined, Jennifer and Kevin, I think you outlined the particulars of it. And Todd, I'll turn it to you if I missed anything.
No, thank you, President Kelly, members of council. Appreciate this opportunity. The only thing I would add is certainly this idea of why this contributes to the public health crisis. I think John spoke very well about how this will help some of our restaurants survive the winter. But as we are requesting that fewer people go out, and as we are, I think Cuyahoga County is under a stay-at-home advisory. This allows restaurants to participate in that more fully and yet have a chance to survive. So I think that's why this is timely to the crisis, and I, why I think this is something. And I appreciate the 90 days. I think that allows it to help through the crisis, and then a little bit of time for folks to adjust afterwards. So I think you guys have handled that really well, and certainly John or I glad to take any questions.
Well, thank you. And I want to, for those of us that were on the health committee meeting this morning, chaired by our new chairman, Carrie McCormick, there is a glimmer of hope on the horizon with the vaccine. So there is a glimmer of an end in sight, but we really have to support this part of the economy to get us through. There are sectors of our economy that are not being affected by this, and quite frankly, some are actually doing better during this time. But restaurants and that small mom and pop retail is not, and that's why I think this is important to consider this. So with that, I'll go to questions. Councilman Blaine Griffin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello, John and Todd. Welcome, and glad that you guys are here. First of all, support this ordinance, and I think it's good being a person that really tries to focus on going to small mom and pop the restaurants. I think this is good to be able to help them. The question that I have, though, is and I want to make sure I ask this the right way. there's a lot of people that are now delivering into the city that have never delivered into the city before. Restaurants and other kind of businesses that have never delivered to the city, especially in areas like where I live, where it used to be, we don't deliver over there. But now they're starting to expand into the area. There's also restaurants in Cleveland that are starting to deliver to entering suburbs. I could think of many of the Shaker Square restaurants that are there. How applicable is this to those restaurants that deliver across borders? Like, are we going to tax or charge, or does this apply for the restaurants that's delivering into Cleveland? Or does this apply to restaurants from Cleveland that are delivering to entering suburbs? How does this apply in those instances? Either you.
My belief is that it is restaurants that are in the city of Cleveland. Those would be the ones that we have authority over, but I will confirm that with Jennifer just to make sure that that is a correct answer.
And Blaine, one of the things that we're trying to do is get this moving in Cleveland, of course, Columbus, Cincinnati, Dayton are bigger cities. And then we think quickly some of the smaller cities that sort of ring the large cities will say, well, now that the language is passed, we understand it, we'll pass it as well. So, for example, in Columbus, we've had discussions with most of the cities that sort of ring the city of Columbus, and they're all looking at this legislation and talking about it at the same time. So we'd like to get it as widespread as we can, so it helps everybody. It doesn't matter where you live. Would be the goal.
Through the chair to the councilman, council president is correct that this only applies to eating and drinking establishments within the city of Cleveland and third-party food delivery services within the city of Cleveland.
So I want to make sure I say this the right way, because some people who live in the edge communities that live where they're abutted by suburban communities, just one of the things that I have somewhat of a concern about is if Cleveland restaurants are now capped at 15%, if I'm understanding, but folks delivering into the city of Cleveland are not capped. That's just want to make sure I understand that.
Yeah, we don't have authority to.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
But if you're a Cleveland restaurant, you can deliver outside the city of Cleveland.
So this actually, reason I'm trying to get to that, because it actually should make Cleveland restaurants and small businesses more competitive, because now they actually would have less fees attached than some of these suburban communities that will have that fee. Is that that's where I'm trying to go with this?
That's certainly the hope.
Okay, and if that's the case, that's a good thing, because what we're actually doing is passing legislation that will actually help our small businesses get a leg up on some of our suburban counterparts. So I think that's one of the reasons why I think this is a good idea. And by us being, we're competing with a lot of small businesses in Shaker and Cleveland Heights and areas like that. And I know, like my colleague Polensik and some of them guys have Euclid and other places that are edge communities. So, I think this gives us a good competitive advantage. The only other thing that I would ask is, what about small business folks? Small independent deliveries. A lot of these small businesses have moved towards not dealing with your DoorDash and Ubereats and some of the larger delivery services. And they've been just basically saying, hey, Blaine from the neighborhood, I'll work with you to deliver my product. This doesn't apply to those type of businesses, does it?
It applies to third-party delivery services.
So it still apply to them regardless.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm supportive of the legislation. Anything that can give our small businesses a leg up, that'd be fine. I just want to make sure that we don't have any adverse impacts, because quite frankly, a lot of people have picked up and become delivery drivers in this pandemic in order to make extra money. And I want to make sure that, we're being fair across the board, but I do think this gives our small businesses a leg up. So really appreciate this, and I'm in support, Mr. Council President. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilman. I just want to make a follow-up comment based on what you, the comments that you brought forth. It's intentionally written to not penalize the driver. And while there are smaller third-party delivery services that are emerging, and I've actually got a letter from one, and I think everybody got the same letter. Most of it is, the Ubereats and the DoorDash, and they're in no danger of going away. It's one's publicly traded, one's about to be publicly traded, and they're not going to go anywhere between now and the end of this pandemic, which hopefully is months away. But it's really, how do we keep this struggling part of the economy, the restaurant owners, how do we help them get through this time? So the drivers themselves are intentionally stated in the ordinance to make sure that their piece is covered. But thank you, Councilman. Councilman Brian Casey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to kind of piggyback on that, obviously these drivers probably, and I don't know because I don't DoorDash or anything like that, but I'm assuming that they probably make a percentage of whatever the food bill is that they're delivering. And for somebody like me, as Councilman Griffin had stated, I represent two border cities in Brook Park and Lakewood. So if the money is capped at 15%, we take into consideration that maybe there won't be people who would come into the city to deliver the product. And I understand that, because they could make more money if they hang out in Lakewood or hang out in Brook Park, as opposed to delivering from Cleveland, because they're capped at the money that could be made.
So let me take one shot at this, and I want to ask John and Todd for their thoughts. Anytime you do legislation, it's hard to plan for every possible scenario. To me, what you bring forth are important points that we should consider. I think on balance, it still weighs out to be better for these restaurants. But what I would ask John and/or Todd is whether Cincinnati has seen any phenoms like that happening, or whether Columbus and I know our law department looked at a number of other cities outside of Ohio that did this. Is that something that we see? Is that something that we need to be concerned about for this hopefully short period of time between now and the easing of this pandemic?
I'll take the first shot at that, and then John, you can add anything to it. And I would say Cincinnati has had it the longest, and we have heard very good response from the restaurant owners and operators, and much less, but we certainly have not heard that DoorDash, that they're having trouble getting drivers to come deliver their product, compared to doing it from other ring communities. So Columbus is just starting, but that's what we've heard from Cincinnati. And we've also, the third-party delivery companies, I think you said it well, DoorDash isn't for it, but in Cincinnati, where it's been the longest, they are not, like suing or being really up in arms about it, like they would be if I think this was tried to be done as a permanent measure as opposed to an emergency measure for the pandemic.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Pat. Anything further, John?
No, I think you hit it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm just trying to think of all angles here, and, could this possibly be hurting small businesses if they don't have somebody that's going to deliver because, they don't make as much money in the city of Cleveland as they would in, hanging out in a suburban area where, they could make more money.
Yeah, and I guess we'll never know for sure, but it seems like the experience of Cincinnati and others wouldn't support that's something that it hasn't been brought forth as a concern of this.
Right. It's a demand. Hey, Brian, it's a demand driven business. And so the demand in the inner cities is so strong for delivery that it hasn't been an issue. And we looked at it outside of the Ohio cities as well. And in some of the materials that I provided to Councilman Kelly, this is in multiple other large cities, including places like Chicago and so forth. And it's all demand driven. And as long as the drivers are kept busy, they go where the demand is. It just the same way that a pickup taxi service might.
Right. Mr. President, I just have small little reservations about that. About possibly hurting the the little guy that's running around trying to, make a few bucks by delivering, and, they don't make as much in the city of Cleveland as they would somewhere else. And I understand Cincinnati and all that other stuff, but it's just a reservation that's in the back of my mind. And, would the restaurants be better off served if they just hired a delivery person? Right. I mean, and totally neglected the percentage at all. Again, I don't run a restaurant, I'm just trying to think outside the box here, but, I have a little bit of a reservation in regards to, people coming in and not making as much in the city as they would somewhere else, just because we've capped something. And I understand it's just for the time being, but that's just a reservation that I have. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. And, I understand the reservation. And again, we have the ability, the authority to amend as needed. And, if it comes up as a problem, but I think, the experience of similar cities and those that do run restaurants is that this has been overall positive on balance with everything considered as it's been administered.
Well, if we could just keep an eye on that, Mr.
Absolutely.
President, and Mr. Barker and Mr. Bowen, if you could, help us along in that process too. I just want to assure that, we help our small businesses, but that we don't, hurt another industry, the people just trying to make a couple of bucks, delivering, that we don't cut into their profits or hurt them as well. And that we don't hurt our small businesses by people not coming into the city to deliver because they wouldn't make as much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Brian Mooney. Still muted.
Sorry about that. I'm looking at this. So this is a 15% cap on the order. Is that what it is, right?
Hmm.
Well, I just see a problem in that some places just won't deliver because a lot of these orders are small. Like near me, Wingstop, you're talking a $12 order. Nobody's going to do this for $3. Nobody's going to, or less than that. If it's a $12 or $15 order, no Uber or DoorDash guy's going to want to drive there, pick up the food, drive a couple of miles to a house for $2 or $3.
So can I ask Mr. Barker, Mr. Bowen, I assume you've heard this argument before. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, we've not heard, Brian, to be respectful, we've not heard that at all. In fact, we hear the craziest stories that they will deliver one order of French fries that somebody orders because they're still going to get paid, a minimum. The second thing is that all the orders that are coming through places like DoorDash and Ubereats, you have to be on their app to do it, and so those businesses would never get those orders otherwise. So people are not, for example, running around on a website, from 400 different restaurants and then randomly, trying to order through that, go through DoorDash. That's why these third-party delivery services are so critical. And we have not heard that at all, that people won't deliver because the drivers are still getting a minimum. Doesn't matter.
What's the minimum? What do you mean by the minimum? You said they'll do it for the minimum. So what do they get beyond the 15%, which for an order of fries would be maybe, we'll say a quarter. So what's the minimum?
Yeah.
You mentioned it. What is it?
Yeah, I'd have to get the exact numbers, but they are required to get a minimum pay. And so
there's a minimum charge on top of the 15%.
So oftentimes they'll charge the customer as well. So the third party charges the restaurateur and the customer.
So there's more than 15% here.
Well, but what we're trying to protect is what the restaurant is paying.
Okay, so the customer, that's the confusion. I get it.
Right. The third party.
So the business will be capped at 15%, but the customer still may have to pay 100%, and that wouldn't stop that. So they'd still make their money.
If you would see the receipts, and I think they're in some of the stories, Kevin, that we sent to you in the links, but if you see a receipt, from somebody who gets a delivery, it spells all that out, but there's a separate fee that they charge the customer. Now, and to give you some idea how well these third-party guys do, Uber is looking at a $3 billion IPO right now as we speak.
Well, right, but I'm just saying in general. So this won't, in other words, it'll cap the restaurants, but the customer still that won't limit what the customer would be charged.
That's right. We're
Okay.
not, yeah, we're not impacting that.
That removes my, okay, then I understand why somebody would deliver a
There's-
hamburger. Because
And
the person
Brian,
getting it may pay $12 for that hamburger.
right, we're all just a little bit older on this call, but the research that we have seen, millennials, there is zero resistance to pay for delivery. I mean, it's almost crazy, you know, and if you look at sort of the numbers of how third-party delivery has grown, it's just phenomenal, right? We're all old enough that we like our money, but younger people seem to, you know, put so much more of it into food and food delivery that it's just, you know.
Okay, well, that clarifies it. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Councilman. Councilman Kevin Conwell.
So here's the question I'm trying to understand. You want to cap it, Mr. President, at 15%, but the businesses, do they benefit from the 30? Because for a point of clarity, I'm talking P&L. Do the businesses, do they benefit? Because I don't know. So excuse me. The 30% goes to the third party, or the 30% would go to the restaurant that would affect their P&L. Talk with me, give me a breakdown on the cost.
I'll take the first shot. That's the 30% would go to Grubhub or Ubereats or DoorDash as their charge to the restaurants. So let's say your hamburger was on your menu at $10,
Mm-hmm.
and if somebody ordered it via delivery, then the restaurant would end up getting $7 and Grubhub would get $3. Grubhub would also get some money from the customer. So we're saying Grubhub should get, instead of $3 out of that $10 pie, they should get $1.50 out of that during this pandemic. But the restaurant therefore gets that extra $1.50. So they get $8.50 instead of $7, which generally makes the difference between them making anything on selling that hamburger or losing just a little bit on selling that hamburger.
Because their margin is small in the restaurant. You know, some of them go by gross, some of them go by net, and it's very small. So what you're doing, you're really trying to control cost, and you're trying to keep the restaurants open. But why would the president, let's say, for example, he's saying to when the pandemic ends, then you open it back up to the 30%. And my question is, why open it back up to 30% when the pandemic ends? Because then you might have some issues afterwards.
So I'll take this one. And basically, you know, it gets to a question of what's the role of government in these transactions. This is an emergency ordinance that is not just by our term of emergency, but this is in response to the COVID-19 crisis, because this is a particularly vulnerable and sector of the economy that's being harmed. And we are therefore legislating within those parameters. If this is a response to COVID-19, when COVID-19 goes away, this goes away and the market takes over.
I got you. Yeah, it's a good piece. I sit back and I thought about it. I know some restaurants go by gross and some go by net, Mr. President, and they have a slim margin, man. They have to control cost of labor, food cost, the whole 9 yards. The restaurant guy, he knows. What's his name? John Baker. And you got
John Barker.
John Barker. You have to control cost. It's a good piece, man. You want to control cost. Have you talked with Uber to see what was their argument? I'm interested.
So I spoke with, and Jennifer spoke with the nice people at DoorDash. And I would say that they are grudgingly okay with it. They wanted the amendment to bring that down to the 90 days. And they also want something to discuss if we want to do a further amendment, and we can talk about this between now and Wednesday, it would be 90 days after the lifting of the governor's emergency declaration, or when restaurants are restored to 100% or are able to function without restriction. So we can consider that as well. But
So
that's the
let
thought
me ask
process.
let me ask a question. Just bear with me. That the 30% hits the restaurants, what's his name? He just narrated the $10. It hits the restaurants average guest check and it doesn't affect the customer, but it hits the restaurant average guest check, and you trying to protect the business because they have a thin margin. Is that correct?
We are, and of course, it's to protect the business, but all the employees. I mean, the employees of these businesses, we're very concerned about these restaurants not making it, and we lose all these jobs in the city.
I know what you're looking at. You're looking at the cost of labor and all of that. It's a thin line. I'm there, Kev. I'm there.
Thank
All
you,
right,
Cal.
thank you. All right.
Okay, so I see no more hands up. I want to thank Councilman Mike Polensik and Councilman Brancatelli. Are you cheering or are you raising your hand?
I'm raising my hand. I'm a co-host, so I don't have the ability to raise my hand in the normal
okay.
platform.
Can I recognize Councilman Polensik and then you? Because that's the order I saw you in.
Thank you,
Councilman
Mr.
Polensik?
Chairman. Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, honorable colleagues, and to the two representatives here, Mr. Baker and Mr. Bowen. Like some of my colleagues, I don't utilize Ubereats, DoorDash, whatever the hell it is, Grubhub.
Mike, we're on a public meeting.
Yeah, I live in a working class neighborhood, so most of the folks in my neighborhood will go to the establishment to get it. So I want to follow up on my colleague Blaine and on Mr. Mooney. So we're going to cap it at 15%. So since I've never utilized this, so who does the restaurant contract with one of these three companies, or does the customer contract to have the food delivered?
Michael, both do. So the customer puts the app on their phone or their iPad. Okay. So they sort of form a contract with that organization. That organization then shows them restaurants that are nearby them. Okay. And so let's say you were going to do that. You go down and say, I'd like to order a hamburger at a restaurant nearby. You use their app to make the order. So you do have a sort of a contract with the third-party app. The restaurant has a separate contract with them, right? They have to have the technology on their end to accept those orders coming in. And so the reason that this is important is, although a lot of people do go and pick up their food, this trend with third-party delivery is so gigantic. I mean, the numbers are mind-boggling in terms of the percent of sales that are moving through third-party, that this is becoming such a pinch point for restaurants. They still are going to have some people come and pick up food and things like that. But if they're not playing with the third-party delivery companies, they are absolutely going to lose market share. And I'll give you an example. The fast food companies, the big companies that have the ability to do this and have these contracts and so forth, I mean, their sales have moved up from, say, 1% to 2% going through third-party delivery. Many of these companies are now up into the teens. All their orders are now going through third-party delivery. So they're picking up all that market share.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Barker, do you have any numbers as it pertains to, most of our neighborhoods they're, again, mom and pop type restaurants. We don't have the big chain operations, except for maybe some fast food places. But do you have any percentages of restaurants in the city that are utilizing third-party delivery?
The question really came from our independent restaurateurs who want to use it. So this conversation really came out of our Cleveland Independent Restaurant Group, which you may be familiar with. There's about 75 to 80 that are in that group, and they're the ones that really have found this to be, an opportunity that they're not really able to take advantage of at that 30%.
Okay. Yeah. So the delivery charge is going to be capped at, recommended to be capped at 15. then what's to stop the delivery companies from passing the additional cost on to the consumer to make up the difference?
They could certainly attempt to do that. We've not seen that necessarily. That they could attempt to do that. I think customers would then have to decide whether or not they're willing to pay that additional charge.
Because that's what I envision. They'll pass it on to the customers, and again, I'm sure there are some people that maybe have to utilize the service. I'm fortunate that I don't, and I'm sure the majority of people. I don't envision in the area that I represent, in the Collinwood and Glenville community, a lot of people having their food delivered from restaurants in our neighborhood. They go get it. But there might be some people who have to have it delivered. And so I just, Mr. Chairman, I would say to Mr. Chairman, have you considered limiting the charge as well to the customer as to what they can tack on?
I have not, and I don't know how broad our authority is, but this has been a solution that has been tested in other places. It is something that to me is reasonable because, as was described, there's a fee that the customer pays on one end. All this does is it limits that which the small mom and pop restaurants have to pay these third-party delivery systems, which are mostly very wealthy corporations. Yes, there are some smaller ones, but for the most part, these are very, these are large corporate interests that are doing very well by charging 30% to our small restaurants.
Okay, I just don't. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. I just don't want to see the people who might be dependent upon this service then starting to get squeezed or getting taken advantage of. That's my concern. And those of us who are on the edge, as Blaine indicated, edge wards, I just want to make sure. So in Cincinnati and in Columbus, those are the two major cities in Ohio that have enacted similar legislation.
Yes.
And when did those pieces pass? Has that been recent?
Columbus was very recent. Cincinnati was earlier this summer.
And have you noticed any uptick as it pertains to the consumer, what the consumer is being charged?
We have not. I think those have stayed similar. For one thing, I think the four main apps kind of compete against each other, especially on the customer side. So they're a little bit capped at how much they could pass that on, because then they might lose market share to the other three apps. And then also there is a point at which the customers will then just decide, I'll go get my food, because I'm sure there are a percent or two who might have to do it this way, but for most, and I think it's mostly a convenience to have it delivered via one of these apps as opposed to a necessity. And so these third-party delivery companies could actually, if they overcharged, could kind of drive their market away and end up, we'd go back to a place where more people went and got their food from the restaurants, and they certainly don't want that.
So we have Ubereats, DoorDash, Grubhub, and what's the other one?
Postmates is the other.
Postmates.
Man,
I must be living in a cave somewhere, let me tell you. Okay.
Your words.
Yeah. I tell you, I'm glad I don't need need those characters. But anyway, okay. So I'm just trying to understand, and I think this is something that we all need to monitor as it pertains to the consumer, because just as we all are very much aware, to my honorable colleagues, how our small neighborhood restaurants and businesses have been negatively impacted. My word is no different than anyone else. I have some that are just hanging by a thread. I just want to make sure that, again, people on the other end, that our customers, our consumers, are not put in a very difficult situation where they're going to get squeezed or suffer the consequences of whatever action we take. So I think, I'd say it's something that we've got to look at very closely. And so, Mr. Chairman, at this point, the tentative date for this to go off would be when?
It would be effective upon passage in the mayor's signature. It would cease 90 days after the governor's declaration of emergency declaration is lifted.
90 days. Okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, honorable colleagues.
Thank you, Councilman Anthony Brancatelli.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Councilman Polensek, this type of technology is not going anywhere. The e-commerce and the tech industries are taking over. You see, ATMs are popping up everywhere, and people still pay $3 a fee to get their own cash out, and instead of going in the mattress like you do. So it's
Right.
so it's it's going to be what the market bears, and I think both John and Todd spoke about that. We're getting rid of a hidden fee that the consumers don't see, that these restaurants are being charged as 30%, but they're getting charged a fee, just like they used to bury fees in their ticket prices for entertainment. Now Ticketmaster started that whole trend of charging ticket fees. Now everybody charges a ticket fee for processing. So it's no longer buried in the cost of the ticket. You are now paying that separately. So you're going to continue to see this happen, including the city. We charge a fee for trash collection. I mean, it's, there's, it's nothing hidden about it. It's what the market will bear. And we have seen areas like Open Table, which is another platform for restaurants, where some of the restaurants have dropped it because they didn't want to pay that fee. And it is as nice a platform as that was for us as consumers. The restaurants were the ones who bore it, and some of them have dropped the Open Table platform just because of those fees that keep eating away at their costs. The question I would have, and it's a follow up a little bit of what Councilman Griffin spoke about around competitive advantage. Have you seen, and I guess for either John or Todd, in those neighboring communities? So one of my favorite pizza shops is Beach Club Bistro. I have to drive through Collinwood to get to it on Lakeshore, but that's in Euclid. I don't know if there's any good pizza shops in Collinwood or not, but would Grubhub and some of those places just cut those local merchants off and say you can't use my platform? Has that happened in some of those communities to say we're just not going to let you utilize our platform if we're going to be regulated this way?
We've not seen that. I can't say it would never happen, but we've not seen that so far. This is all, just like everything with this pandemic, things have been evolving so rapidly during all this. And I think the bigger cities moved on this first, very aggressively. And now, what we're seeing is more and more cities doing this to just try to save, those inner city restaurants. And I think we're going to learn, but I think, having the 90-day cap, once the governor lifts the restrictions is the appropriate way to approach this. And, whether or not this is something long-term that the market's going to settle out, right? I think we're going to find out, but that's going to be probably a year after, the pandemic. We'll see where this goes, right? There's 4 big competitors right now. If these fees stayed at this height, knowing how the market works, there's going to be a bunch of competitors that come into this, right? If they can continue to get 30%, my guess is, having studied the market for a long time, you have other people come in and they'll slowly bring the market forces will bring the cost down over time.
Well, I think it was raised a little bit in some of the discussions about not wanting some of the inner city neighborhoods to be redlined, and by being able to just cut off user agreements because they're getting a smaller percentage, that would be a concern I would raise. But we'll see how this plays out and see what feedback we get, and consumers then can make the decision: do I want to pay $2 for delivery or $3 for delivery? But it'll be the choice the consumer makes, not taken away from the restaurant. So I understand the point of this, and I understand it's also a temporary measure to get us through this pandemic. So I appreciate the chairman raising this, and I fully support this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman McCormick, did you have a question, or were they all answered?
All good. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. Okay, seeing no more questions, no more hands, I want to thank our guests. I want to thank Jennifer and the Law Department for putting this together on fairly short notice. So with that said, ordinance number, I'm switching screens right now. Ordinance number 966, 2020 stands approved. Thank you all very much. Okay, now we're going to move to the Finance Committee ordinances, and We have ordinance 933, 934, and 935 to get through. Normally when we do this, I'm going to read 933 and 934 together. And 935 is the temporary ordinance. Director, does it make sense to, if I were to knock the temporary ordinance out first and then go to the other two, or should I read all three together?
It doesn't matter, whichever you want. The temporary ordinance is, for 2021. So either way,
Right.
it's fine with me.
Is it baked into the other two in any way?
Just that the operation of 2020 lays a platform for 2021. Other than that, the numbers are not connected, other than looking at historic operations and what needs to happen in 2021.
Okay. Let me do the first two, and then I'll do the last. So I'm going to read 933 and 934 together. Ordinance number 933, 2020, Councilmember Kelly by departmental request, an emergency ordinance to make additional appropriation of $20 million to the general fund, $12 million to the special reserve fund, and $700,000 to the internal service fund. Ordinance number 934, 2020, Councilmember Kelly by departmental request, an emergency ordinance to provide for the transfer and amendment to the general fund appropriations in the amount of $11,731,500, $120,000 within the special revenue fund, and $88,000 within the internal service fund. Director, Chief.
Okay. So
And
just as
before you start, I believe we're going to be sharing the screen, and Councilman Brancatelli, if you can just kind of guide him on which slide we're on. These were emailed to everybody somewhat recently. I apologize about the late nature that you received this. That's why we're going to have them on the screen.
Which one would you like to do first, 933 or 934?
let's do the transfer ordinance, which is 934. The book actually covers both, right? So if you pull up the book that says transfer ordinance 934, 933, when you open it, you'll be on the transfer ordinance. There you go.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you. So I don't want to kind of spend too much time talking about our current status and circumstance, because you guys know there is a dual page there. So you guys are going to have to, okay, it gives the numbers on one side and then kind of the explanations on the other side. So you have either books or, so I'm going to go through it that way. But at any rate, what's happened, of course, it's good. Whatever happened, you'll have hard copies when we come back on Wednesday, along with the electronic. But what's happened so far for us this year, of course, has happened to every other city, and the larger urban areas, of course, are more adversely impacted than some of the smaller areas, because we have, of course, much more responsibility and liability. Our original operating budget was around $675 million for this year on both the expense and revenue side. As you guys know, we've lost some money, a great deal of money, in both hospitality taxes and also income taxes. And so that gave us a variance in our budget that was adverse to our operations. We have also received, as others have across the United States, COVID funds, the CARES Act, which allowed us some ability to reimburse ourselves for some of the expenses that we incur, particularly in public safety and in health. So that helped us to kind of manage what would have been our deficit position. From the state level, of course, we've received some large refunds from workers' comp. So that allowed us to kind of balance 2020 and also lay a platform for 2021. So having said that, I'll go through the book and then I'll kind of get you guys kind of up to snuff. But for the most part, in the transfer ordinance, all of the savings that you're going to see will be a result of vacancies in those areas, because of course we went into a hiring freeze when we started to go into the stay-at-home orders and the impacts of what COVID had to do to our operating budgets. So for the most part, in the transfer ordinance, contrary to what normally happens, because normally if we're operating regularly during a year, you'll see some enhancements as it relates to kind of like overtime or some expenses of delivering services. During this COVID situation, we've had some restrictive activities that didn't allow us to operate normally. So in the transfer ordinance, you're going to see some savings as a result of hiring freeze. You're going to see some savings from contracts and professional services that could not be performed from a remote area. It required like a physical presence, and some savings in materials, supplies, and fuel, just because we had a longer process by which to deliver services and less operating days, and the COVID kind of restrictions that we had to do around PPE and protecting our workers. And so all those things cost us in some of those areas. In our increases, you're going to see contracts that were ratified, our labor agreements. And of course, you know, we have about 35 labor agreements, and most of them for the year 2019 through 2021 have been ratified. In this last 6-week period, we will be paying the CARES agreement, which, as you know, is 6 years. It's 2 contractual agreements because they hadn't settled the one prior. We'll also be doing Local 93, which will be the gross wage increase along with retro pay. And we'll also be doing non-union civil service people. So you'll see those increases, and SEIU. You'll also see significant increases in telecom. Telecom is how we had to buy all the laptops, update our services, and be able to do remote work, which was a tremendous expense to a lot of folks. And again, COVID related costs, including like the diversion program out of the courts, which has that, that will contribute to us having less people incarcerated and moved to that diversion program, and the ankle bracelet, which courts talked to you about last week. And also you're going to see that we had some settlements in the transfer ordinance. So having said that, Councilman Brackatelli, I'll begin. So if you look at the first line, and again, you'll have hard copies of this tomorrow. In the municipal court, the judicial division, the $1.5 million that you see as a transfer from the left-hand side, of course, is transfers to and transfer from. Those are savings due to vacancies because we instituted, of course, the hiring freeze. And on the other side of that is the Oriana contract, which is the diversion program. That's $650,000. In the office of the mayor, that $10,000 is due to vacancies. And again, the below the line is telecom meetings, because you have to do the virtual meetings at this point, and also the telecom with doing work from home. Board of Zoning Appeals, on the transfer to side, of course, it's the non-civil service union, non-union contracts. And of course, has always been our practice that when the bulk of our larger unions have settled, then those same raises or terms and conditions of employment are passed along to non-union civil service type people in every branch of government. Now, of course, that does not apply to the court's staffing, because the court has their own internal salary plan. And so they handle that through their own internal negotiations. So in the court, it does not apply to their staffing because they've been using their staffing plan since 2019. Okay. And the savings, of course, is due to vacancies in Board of Zoning, that small amount, that 1,500. In the next Department of Human Resources, those are increases in 2 contracts, which are Concentra and SCT, which are being used for physicals and drug screenings. And those are predominantly used for the safety classes. Okay, so we're still doing classes because we're under consent decree, and we're still getting people in to do the drug screenings and the physicals for safety classes in both police, fire, and EMS. Okay, in the Department of Law, we've had 2 settlements that we had to accommodate, and those settlements were both cases of wrongful incarceration. And you're going to have a conversation with the law director if you want to know like details. But at any rate, one is called the Ajumo case, AGUMO, and that amount had to be paid this year, which was $4.5 million. And the other is called the Ayers case, AYERS, and that one was $4.850. And so those 2 had to be paid from this year. The Ajumo case is a multi-year settlement. So it's one who was incarcerated for a long period of time wrongfully, and the city was found at fault. And so you'll have a similar distribution of 4,000,007 in 2021, which you'll see in the temporary ordinance because it has to be played by April, 2022, and 2023. So that's what you see in the Department of Law. Okay, in finance admin, those savings, of course, are due to vacancy. And in the other side of on the workers' comp contract, because Romero is part of my admin office, the workers' comp contract picked up 2 additional months as opposed to 12 months so that they could be on a regular calendar year. So they would go from, they normally would expire in October. So they picked up November, December, and made it like a 14-month contract as opposed to a off calendar year contract. In the division of accounts, the transfer to the $10,000 is the non-union civil service increases, which on the contractual increases, it's 2%, 2 and 2 for 19, April 1, 2 for 2020, April 1, and then 1.5 for fiscal year 2021, because of course the first 4 months are under the other contract. So that's the contractual wage increases that were passed along. In the division of assessments and licenses, the savings is due to vacancies, and the savings below that, the 450, is due to contractual services that could not be performed unless the individuals could have a physical appearance, and with all of the restrictions on travel and all that, they could not. And so those contracts were for the online permitting and also the credit card savings and credit card fees. So those will have to be picked up when there's an availability of these individuals to actually meet the requirements of the contract and actually come here to work. Okay, go to the next page. In the Bureau of Internal Audit, you'll see 125,000, which of course is savings due to vacancies, and 400,000 from the state auditor's fee, because the state auditors, of course, could not make the physical appearance here to do auditing. They did a lot of remote, but we incurred less costs because they had less staff and less expenses with not being here directly. The next one is, of course, information systems. The savings were due to vacancies and the increases are due to telecom. The division of health, the savings were due to vacancies and the increases again due to telecom. And again, telecom is a reference to the purchasing of everything that's necessary for remote working, which includes the tablets, connections, iPhones, whatever communication devices we needed. So, and any upgrades to systems that we needed to do that. So the division of health, that's, and if you go to the division of environment, that was a savings in food establishment inspections, because quite naturally with all of the restaurant closings and the interruptions in services, all of the inspections that are scheduled in some restaurants 3 to 4 times a year, of course, they didn't take place with some of the closings that have taken place in restaurants. And public safety admin, the 27,000 is a savings due to vacancies. And of course, below the line, it is an increase in telecom charges. In the division of police, again, the 375,000 is due to vacancies. And below the line, the 50,000 is telecom charges. In the division of fire, we had a ratified union agreement, which I discussed at the beginning. And so that's the $1.5 million, which would be the increase in wages, which is the 2, 2, and 2 in fiscal 2021. And also the ratified union agreement allows for the retro payment of that period of time. So retro back to April 1, 2019. EMS, that savings was due to vacancies, and also we tried to anticipate that we would have some settlement of their first contract, that 2016 to 19. And so we built in money to carry that contract, but it didn't get settled in 2020 the way we had hoped. So in the division of corrections, that's a savings in contractual services. Again, that's diversion programs out of the court. We did some auditing of bills that they presented, and they were, upon audit, we were being charged more than we should have been. And so we have that as a reduction to them. They still hold that they have some outstanding bills, but we'll accommodate that when it presents itself. We have some agreements with, as you know, CMHA, RTA, and a couple of outside sources, and we paid their correction fees also, their incarceration fees. So when they present them, then we'll provide for them. Okay, the Office of Professional Standards, the savings was due to vacancies, and the 60,000 below the line has to do with using the Snyder-Blake contract to try to clear up some of the backlog that they have in cases where people have made complaints. In the Police Review Board, the transfer two, of course, is the non-union civil service increase, a small amount of $1,000, and then a savings of $1,000 in contractual services. Okay, the Community Police Commission, the transfer in, of course, is non-union civil service increases, and the transfer out is from videographer services. If you remember last year, we gave them a contract to do their own videography of their meetings, and of course, because of restrictions and the social distancing, there's not been meetings, and they didn't use that. Service. There's not been in-person meetings. And in the DOJ, the savings is due to uniform overtime. The police, of course, because they couldn't go remotely to get trained, we had some savings in there due to overtime. As we built into this budget, some backfill for the officer that had to go to the training that was associated with the consent decree. And on the other expenses, those savings are for advertising, monitoring, and training resources. Again, those are interactions that would take the be against the mandate of the social distancing or the social gathering, and so they weren't able to use those as effectively as they could in a regular environment. In the Department of Public Works, the $600,000 in recreation was due to vacancies. And the transfer also is savings in utilities, materials, and supplies. And of course, it has to do with the closure of the rec centers, that we didn't incur as much utilities, supplies, and materials that we had anticipated had we had a normal operating year. In the Department of Community Development, again, that $200,000 is due to vacancies. The $5,000 is just an increase in the telecom charges. In the Division of Code Enforcement, the $250,000 again is due to vacancies under Building and Housing. And Economic Development, the $5,000 is due to vacancies and $5,000 in telecom charges. So that's the total for the transfer ordinance, which came to a total of about 11.7 million on a $675 million budget. So that's less than a 2% transfer. So do you want me to answer questions here, or do you want me to go on to supplemental?
I'd like you to do supplemental, please, and have our questions in one bucket.
Okay. So then the next, oh wait, let me finish. I'm sorry, I missed one page. Under, let's see. Let me see what this one is. Okay, I'm sorry.
Is it special revenue funds?
Yeah, the special revenue funds. I'm sorry, the special revenue funds that are part of the transfer ordinance. I'm sorry. That's just the one page that you see there. Where streets, it was 120,000 due to the ratified union contract. That was money transferred in. These are outside of the general fund. It's one page for special revenue funds. And then 120,000 again in materials and supplies. And again, that had to do with shutdown of work and not expending as much money. Those are small amounts for the streets division. In the sinking fund, another small amount, because it's only 2 employees. The personnel related expenses is the non-union civil service increases. And then again, below the line is the savings in contractual services. And motor vehicles, again, the 80,000 is the ratified union contract, which we had to retro and pay. And then of course, savings in fuel because of what happens with COVID. And it's still the total, all funds is still under 2% on a large budget. Now we go to supplemental. Okay. And the supplemental, of course, is additional appropriations in funds. You see $20,000 additionally appropriated in the general fund, 20 million, 12 million in special revenue funds, and 700,000 in internal service funds. So the transfer to other funds, which is the 20 million in the general fund, is $5 million to demolition, $5 million to economic development to support business programs. And those are the grants and loans that they're giving to small businesses in order to help sustain them and keep them solvent and bring them back to business. In CD, it's $5 million, and those are what we call the people programs, which are assistance on utilities, food, shelter, and those rent subsidies. So those are out of the CD area, and then $5 million to the streets program. In the Department of Public Works, that's the stadium transfer, which is a $12 million request on the part of the Browns for repairs to the stadium. Now, of course, we have a lease with the Browns, and we put in X amount each year as part of the capital fund. And this request of $12 million will be advancing a couple years funding to meet some of those requirements. This year's would have been $850,000. Next year's about $5.9 million, and the following year is about $5.2 million. And then on the internal service fund, telephone exchange, again, that's an increase in the AT&T contract that related to landlines we had to install as a communication thing during COVID, and also the issuance of cell phones, and then the subsequent monthly expenses associated with those cell phones to public safety type individuals for the most part, and also to health and other areas that had to meet those mandates. And so that's the supplemental ordinance.
Okay.
So now I'll answer questions on that before we go to the temporary ordinance.
Great. So Director, I'll spend more time between now and Wednesday going over the document, but unfortunately I had to miss the municipal services and properties, where I know that the Browns issue was discussed. Can you are all of those I'm assuming that they are major capital items, are they all pursuant to the contract that we have based on the capital assessment that we've done? And again, I should have listened in this morning, but I just couldn't.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, I'm going to say yes, because I asked the same question of them on my meetings with the Browns over the last week or so, that I met with them and spoke to them about the repairs. So as you well know, they did an assessment of the stadium. We did an assessment of the stadium, and then came up with a multi-year plan to meet some of these critical capital needs and whose responsibility it is, given that we own it. We basically, the language, as you well know, speaks to infrastructure, critical repairs as being a responsibility of the owner, and then upgrades or enhancements a responsibility of the Browns. So yes, those repairs are evaluated by MOCAP and an outside consultant, and they go through an approval process that involves law and a determination of the language. So yes, to date, those requested repairs are in alignment with the lease and the responsibilities of the owner, which would be the city.
Okay, and just being at a slight disadvantage because I don't have that information in front of me, I'll should I get that information from Director Sprons in terms of the capital requests that were made for the stadium? Again, I assume it was all presented this morning, but yes. Is that the proper place for me to direct my inquiry?
Yes, they would have the detail and the cost assessment on each one of the requests that brings it to the 12 million. So yes, that would be Director Sprons.
Okay, thank you. And then at this time, I would like to open up for questions, comments on these two ordinances before we do the temporary ordinance.
Mr. Chairman?
Councilman?
Yeah, thank you. I know the Browns piece is for capital repairs, but one of the questions is relative to our ticket fees. I know we only have a handful of tickets that are being sold right now, so we're collecting a much smaller percentage on the ticket fees for the Browns facility right now.
You mean the admission tax?
The admission tax, yeah.
Yeah, we're getting killed. Director, do you want to?
I will speak about it generally, because of course it's tax information, so it has some confidentiality. As with all of the sports and the entertainment or hospitality type venues, our amount that we've collected, not only for admission tax, but all of the taxes associated with it, which would be the hospitality taxes, which is what we call them here, which would be, of course, parking fee, hotel motel bed tax, rental car fee, and admission tax. We had at the beginning of the year projected about 40 million. We're going to end the year with around 17 million. And in some of those instances where people bought, not knowing pandemic was coming, and they bought seasonal tickets, and we collected, of course, our money up front, we've had to do some degree of refunding. We negotiate to some degree and say, you know, geez, can we keep it until next year when you know you're going to have, but in some instances, they have to refund the person that paid. And so we have some success in having not to return the full amount, but to return some increment of that. So yes, it has been impacted, yes.
So, and this is just more of a detail which we can deal with offline, but a lot of venues now are selling the pictures of that person in that seat, but they're selling it. It's a revenue. So I'd be curious to know, what does that mean for our taxes if they're selling that seat with someone's photo in it?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Okay, well, we can talk about that later, but that's a point I just wanted to raise. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I didn't know about
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Kerry McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. President. One general question, one specific one. Present to the director, the 32.7, these are funds that we have received. Let me phrase that as a question. Are these funds that we have received, not projected?
Mr. Chair, to the councilman, that is correct.
Okay, so we're not playing with fire here and projecting 32.7 and then looking at a COVID reality that's much different.
No, the transfer ordinance and the supplemental are 2020 activity. So these are dollars that we have in our possession. Where the stadium is concerned, of course, you know, we collect the sin tax. So we collect that and we put it in an escrow account and then we fund capital repairs from that. So all of these are dollars that are in our possession and they would affect our 2020 operating.
Thank you. And then specifically, Director, the 5 million for streets, is that, I would imagine that would be a 2021 expenditure. Is that correct?
You are absolutely correct. Yes.
Okay. And with that,
what it does is allow us to do that $12 million program, right? Over the course of the year, we try to do a $12 million program. So that 5 will allow us to have a $12 million program in 2021.
And that's what I'm curious about. And I understand that, so, you know, some part of that, of course, has to go through council, but in thinking about our budget and the restraints that COVID's putting on it, you know, the all, you know, important and favorite topic of streets for council members. I'm curious about how that 5 million projects that $12 million program for 21. Are you saying, Chair to the Director, that you're confident that we will have that $12 million program for 21?
Yes, what we've structured, what we do is that we reconcile any amount of dollars that we currently have on the books for street resurfacing. And then we figure out how much we have outstanding to pay for 2020. And then we use that as kind of a beginning balance. It's always small. Then I make a determination between how much we have to float in capital bonds. And if I have some ability to supplement that from cash, then it's less debt that I have to float. So yeah, we have structured a $12 million program for 2021.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President.
If I could just, I just want to add to just put an exclamation point on that answer. And the answer is yes.
Yes.
We are going to have the streets program at the $12 million level next year. I've spoken with the chief about this previously, and I think, you know, it's well known as a priority of council.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Brian Casey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to piggyback on top of that, if we had moved this $5 million over from 2020 to 2021 in the streets, does that mean that we would have only had a $7 million program for streets for next year? Or would it have still been at $12 million?
I believe.
I'm sorry, Councilman, say that one. I didn't understand that.
All right, we're transferring $5 million into streets for the program for next year.
Yes.
Hypothetically, if we didn't have this $5 million to move over, does that mean out of the general fund for 2021, we would have only had a $7 million program?
No, because the streets program, as the council president said, he's expressed often that that's a priority. So that would be included in my capital bond funding. So in order to have less debt where street resurfacing is concerned, if I have cash, I try to reserve it going forward. And I believe our ask on the capital bonds will be about $4 million. So if I did not have this 5, then I would be floating $9 million to meet the $12 million program.
Okay, so it's not like we have a $12 million program, we're gonna throw 5 more into it, and we have 17 million.
No.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to clarify that for future reference. And then the 5 million in demolition, 5 million in the streets. Who decides that that's where we're putting that money? And
Who
5 million
decides
into economic development, yeah.
Who decides it? Okay,
Who or what process decides that?
the budgeting process happens through, by law, it happens through the administration giving its estimate to council. And quite naturally, I, listen to council all year long and speak to council about what their priorities are. And then I go back and forth between mayor and have some conversation with the council president. So how that's decided is a matter of priorities and kind of where more attention or resources need to be given.
Okay.
And given that we have the highest, foreclosure and are still working our way through demolishing residential, commercial, and all that, demolition is always a priority.
And then, Mr. President, to the director or the chief, one last clarification. You mentioned that the $12 million for the Brown Stadium, and you projected that out for 3 years?
No, it actually is immediate repairs that they need, but we have a schedule, a capital schedule in our lease agreement with the Browns that tells how much money we will put into capital over a 20-25 year period. And in order for us to advance them $12 million, our capital schedule allows for $850,000 in 2020, 5.9 in 2021, and 5.2 in 2022. So they have to credit us with advancing that money, because we can't spend 12 and then come back and pay 5.9 and pay 5.2. We don't have that kind of resources. And there's a schedule that identifies that.
Okay.
So we're advancing them.
Yeah, just because in municipal properties and services this morning, we went over what it was that they requested for this, but there was no price tag attached to it.
Yeah.
Right, the projects were there, but it seemed like what they were asking for would probably be more than 850,000 for this year.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. That's why I just you had mentioned that it was over a 3-year period, but
Yes.
all right, I just wanted clarification on that. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Director Chief.
Councilman Kevin Conwell.
I'll be real quick. To the director, you showed us $4 million and some change. I think it was from the workhouse or something like that. Is that correct?
Yes, it's from the corrections, Division of Corrections.
So is that what you did a good job? Is that what you guys normally do? You go over the contracts to see, is the city doing any money?
Yes, explicitly, we go over them. That's the billing for prisoner board and care or any other costs associated with our contract with the county when we turned over the jail services to them. So yes, they had given us an estimate that was much larger. And yes, we go bill by bill, prisoner by name, and from the date they actually were incarcerated to the time they were released. And then we check that against the ordinance authority of how long they're supposed to keep them. And if they kept them longer than they were supposed to, we don't pay for the extra days. Okay, so yes, we go over it very carefully.
That's good. So let me ask you this, then I'll yield. Do you do the same thing with purchasing and procurement for all the contracts that go through the city? Is there a system set up to do that? Because sometimes it's dollars left on contracts and we could audit it to, or do the inventory or the audit to, you know, sometimes some contracts may have 50,000 or 25 or even $5,000 on it. Are we using that same kind of system?
We use a system of sample auditing because, of course, over the course of a year, we process more than 200,000 contracts. So we can't go through every single one, but we do sample auditing through the internal audit division. And if we have any indication that a contract is performing outside of its compliance, then we go and look at exactly that contract.
Yeah, you know, I call those things nuggets. So thank you. I was just asking a question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Mike Polensek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, my honorable colleagues, and to the director. Going back to the 20 million and the 5 million that has been set aside for demolition, was that dollar amount? Did we discuss that? I'm trying to jog my brain here. Did we discuss that earlier in the year? That 5 million?
I didn't have any discussion with you guys directly around 5 million. What we have, of course, is a perpetual universe,
Right.
which I get from building and housing, as to how much property still needs to be demolished, residential, commercial, and industrial. This is a tiny fraction of what those possibilities may be in fiscal 2021. So you got that Safe Routes program, and then the extension from the Safe Routes programs around schools, and then you have commercial buildings, then the big industrial buildings, which we know takes a lot more money. But we don't have the double-digit funding that's required to meet those on every fiscal year, and particularly this one where we had poor kind of revenue performance. So this is rather seed money with the hopes that, you know, there'll be some more county programs and some interaction with the county land bank folks, and they'll be demolishing things together to address some of the needs. So this is just a fraction of what's needed.
Okay, so at this point, right now it's 5 million.
Yes.
There's, and as you've indicated, we're hoping to receive
Yes.
something else. Okay. Going back to the House of Corrections money, and you can throw that back up on the screen if you could. What do we got here? House of Corrections. House of Corrections. Where do we have it there? House of Corrections. I don't see it.
No.
Okay, it was not there.
Go back, go, yeah.
Okay. There it is. Okay. During the, if you can recall, during the budgetary process, when we did the when we did the budget reconciliations, and I indicated at that time that I had estimated that there would be at least $4 million surplus in that, and we were told that that wasn't going to happen.
Yes.
So, you know, it did happen. It did happen. And I'm so glad that it's there. That
Yeah,
it did.
maybe you're like a genie or inside.
That's exactly. I had that crystal ball. That,
But believe me, I make my people check that 4 times because of you. Okay, I did.
So I knew what drawer you were going to stick that in. Okay,
Stick it anywhere.
And you found it. Okay, so it just that's why the budgetary process, the reconciliation, is so important.
Yes.
Look at stuff like that. That we.
So I agree with you entirely. But
we're finding that 4 million.
Yes, but actually, I'm actually removing it because the justifications that they presented about what we owe and who we owe it for didn't total that amount. And so I am moving it. And I don't want to say too much publicly, but it was substantially above what we, after we audited it, what we should have been paying. And so we did bring that back. Now, they do still say that they have some outstanding bills because we have these partnerships with RTA, CMHA, and some of the others for prisoner board and care. And we've not seen those yet, but I would provide for those upon receipt.
Yeah.
So that's why we moved it. But yes, you were correct. And I give you that kudo that you were correct.
Thank you, Madam Director, Acting Chief of Staff. I thank you very much for that. And I
What's
always
that
look
saying
forward.
about the blind squirrel?
And I always look forward to working with you to find that where you stick that money. I'm always intrigued how effective and efficient you are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other hands, I want to now go to the temporary ordinance. Ordinance number 935, 2020, Councilmember Kelly, by departmental request, an emergency ordinance to make temporary appropriations for the current payrolls and other ordinary expenses of the city of Cleveland from the period of January 1, 2020 until the effective date of the annual appropriation ordinance for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2021. Chief?
As I shared with you guys, what will impact the temporary ordinance in terms of its base will be the ratified union contracts. And we have the bulk of those are done. And so you're going to see an increase in base pay that amounts to the 222 in terms of their pay, and also any wage-driven expenses, which you guys know are pensions and workers' comp and all of that. Those will all be higher because of the base pay. So you'll see that predominantly. You'll also see in 2021, in accordance with the consent decree, we'll be doing we've scheduled for 3 police classes. And they're already starting some of those recruitments and bringing them on, 2 fire and 2 EMS. What Councilman Brackatelli is showing on the screen is our inside cover that gives you the assumptions that we used in preparing the temporary ordinance, which you know is the first 3 months of operation while we go through budget hearings, right? And so we have 26 pay period cycles, of course, but for the temporary, it comes to about 7 of those cycles. Longevity is in at 100%. Because, you know, the payout, of course, is March 31. Separation is in to the best of our knowledge for the first quarter. This is for 1 quarter. Hospitalization, pension, prescriptions, dental, vision for the first quarter, PERS for the first quarter, police and fire pension for the first quarter, FICA, Medicare, workers' comp, unemployment comp, clothing allowance, clothing maintenance, and the new department or new division of health, equity, and social justice. And of course, again, the settlement that will be due in April of next year, we included. And so that's what's in the temporary budget. The temporary budget, or the budget as it stands now for 2021, excuse me, the dollar amount is about 655.7 in total. And the revenue anticipated is about 632 million in total. It's our intent to end each one of the operating years close to our 43 million that we started the beginning of the year with. So we hope we began at fiscal 2020 with 43 million unencumbered. We're hoping to end the year with close to that. And we're hoping to end 2021 with close to that. We did not build in anything that speaks to any kind of a stimulus package because we don't know if we'll continue to get CARES Act money. We did our estimates based on hopefully some economic turnaround in hopefully early spring, early summer, you know, late spring, early summer. So we did some things based on, you know, 5 months or with lack of 5 months and then, you know, 7 months left or 4 months and 8 months left, depending on what the activity was. And so we're hoping that our, you know, economy picks up and we're able to pick up some of those fees that you discussed, the hospitality fees and income taxes, more towards hopefully early summer, late spring.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Questions, comments on ordinance number 935-20? All right, I'm not seeing any hands, and we do this every year, and I think this is the easiest of the 3.
Right.
So I appreciate that. If there are no further questions, that will conclude our agenda for the day. So if there is nothing for the good of the order, know that there will be a hard copy of this presentation in your box. If you're able to have somebody go to City Hall to pick it up for you, or get there yourself to look through, because it does have a side-by-side component when you open it up. It's hard to put on a screen. So if there's nothing else for the good of the order, oh wait, Councilman Brian Casey. Unmute, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we have a moment of miscellaneous?
Sure.
I don't know if Director Dumas has to stay on the line or not, but it's fine if she does. But we're going into 2021. When we have our committee hearings, if they're all going to be online, is there any way that we could get some members of the administration to join us on our weekly or bi-weekly council meetings? I bring that up because last week we were talking about snow removal, and we were just talking to each other and didn't have anybody from the administration there to answer any questions. So I was just wondering if that's something that could be discussed with the administration about our Zoom council meetings or committee of the wholes going forward for next year.
Yeah. Well, for committee of the whole, there'll be a director on for every piece of legislation that we.
Well, at least for our council meetings, just in case we have miscellaneous or we have some questions during our council meetings that need to be answered.
I'll leave it to the chief, but we'll discuss that offline. I don't think we're in
Okay,
not in a position to answer.
thank you.
Thank you. Council Mike Polensek. Please unmute. Please unmute. As nice as this is, please unmute. Councilman Polensek.
now?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I got three things to press here. No, I would concur with Councilman Casey. I think it's important that there be somebody from the administration on the Zoom. I dislike it as much as anyone, and it's important that when we have a question, just as we would at a regular council meeting, that we'd have the ability to stand up on the floor and ask a member of the administration. So again, I think it's something that has to be discussed. I think just common courtesy that we have somebody there from the administration who can answer a question should a council member have one. I would concur with Mr. Casey.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Okay. If there's nothing else for the good of the order, thank you all very much. And make sure you book appropriate time Wednesday. I think the agenda is going to be more than our usual Wednesday. So make sure you calendar that properly.
Council President, are you going to want us to go over the line items in the book again on Wednesday?
I'd like you to have it available for questioning.
Okay.
I don't know if we need, it'll be in everybody's email and a physical copy. I don't know if we need to go line by line again, but if a question arises regarding that, I would like there to be somebody, I'd like just people to be prepared to answer any line item question that comes up.
Understood.
Okay, thank you all very much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.